So the first thing I ever noticed about you
Yeah.
is that you have one of the best voices for just generally speaking about things. So
Okay.
the first thing I noticed when I met you through just the Leamington Flyers stuff, I was like, man, this guy's got like, there's like a charisma about the way you
He's
speak,
got the pipes.
which I noticed when I was listening to the podcast series you did. What was it called again?
With the Hockey Factories. Yeah. So it was just the Hockey Factories podcast that we'd spin from the articles. Yeah.
Right. So that like your voice fits perfectly.
Yeah.
So you sound like you could be announced whatever. And then you were just mentioning before we started that you were doing something in radio before that.
Yeah.
So
Radio had been my origin story. I went to Humber College in Toronto for radio broadcasting, and have had the voice and the face for radio. As you can tell with the no haircut and beard.
Yeah.
That's a Leamington Flyers thing. Hopefully, I don't have to shave till May. But I think I'm the only one that's cheering for this to go any longer at home. But,
yeah, that's right.
Right. So that was my story. Was always I'd gotten into radio and worked in radio for about 11 years or so.
So because you also do like a lot of speaking things, like you speak. I know just from my perspective, I know just through the coaches site and stuff like that. How did you develop like that ability where, I don't know if do you have nerves when you speak in front of people or on a mic or whatever, or like how do you manage and deal with that? Like how did you develop the voice?
I like it. Like I find it's weird that, and I've been fortunate enough to be invited twice by the coaches site to present. It was at TCS Live 3 years ago, and then when they were at St. Andrews, when we got a chance to connect with Dan and Jake, and I was more intimidated at that one than I was at the one in Ann Arbor, because the room in St. Andrews was, and I don't know how many people, maybe 75, 100 people, something like that. And then the theater in Ann Arbor was probably 400 or so. So I don't know why bigger crowds I feel more comfortable in, probably because I don't notice all of the eyes that stare at you blend together, as opposed to the one guy that's looking at his phone in the corner. You notice him a little bit more while you're talking.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's really been it. So I mean, from a presenting standpoint, I've always been fascinated with people like TED Talks and all that, and how people can deliver information, because I've always found, and this was something we had even taught in our radio broadcasting days at school, was like you can, you say the sentence of, did you steal my pen, and emphasize each word in a different version of the sentence means something completely different every single time. So being able to deliver a message is, in most cases, I think, more important than the message that you're delivering, because if it doesn't come across and it doesn't connect with who's on the other side, then both of you kind of wasted your time.
Yeah, that's it. So have you noticed any difference between, if you're on like doing radio stuff, for example, on the microphone, do you notice a lot of differences between that and then being in front of a crowd? Like, is there, or because at least like for me, I'm thinking of myself with the podcast, I've noticed that just speaking into a microphone like this, where I know people listen, seems to translate a bit when I'm speaking in front of crowds. So I know it seems like those are not the same thing, but I've just noticed that I have a comfortability now speaking in front of larger groups of people, and I'm sure it has to do with this practice.
Yeah,
that I get
absolutely.
Here. I don't know if you found the same thing, or
if anything, I notice just with myself, like it's more of an energy thing for me. So like when we're on the radio, or when we're doing these, like this is just a conversation, you and I. I'm not looking at the phones or cameras or the thousands or millions of people that are listening. But when you're in the building and in front of people, I think there's just more energy in that room. So I tend to talk faster, and when I talk faster, I stumble over words. And I think my third and fourth most common word used is and ah. Yeah. So if you ever listen to me at any stretch, I'll drop those in most of the time. So I noticed that happens more when I'm doing that. So I'm not good at watching that stuff back and reflecting. To me, once it's out, it's in the air, and there's nothing you can do about it. But there is a learning tool to it, that watching some of those things back and realizing, oh, maybe I tried to put 20 minutes of information into a 15-minute presentation, where instead I know that I'm going to want to go off a little bit, depending on what the crowd and the atmosphere is like, okay, maybe I prep for a 10-minute one because I know I'll go a little bit longer, as opposed to trying to jam more stuff into a small period of time.
Right. Yeah. So anyways, that was kind of one of the first things I noticed, is like the command that you have in the voice. So it makes sense that you were doing stuff with radio before. So how did you go from, because I mean, I met you through Leamington, and then it happened that you were also doing some of this stuff with the coaches site. I knew you were a contributor there, and then you had spoken at some other events and stuff like that. So where did the transition happen for you? Well, I guess just from a hockey standpoint in general, like where did that interest come from? Then how did you get into maybe doing some of like writing articles and researching some of like the different Hockey Factory things? Like what was the jump from doing radio, tailing that interest in with hockey, and then developing like this podcast series and stuff like that?
Yeah. I've been blessed, man. I've been so fortunate to, when you go through that, and anytime I hear like, you've done the podcast and the articles and all that stuff, like that's my reflection moment. That's like, that is pretty cool. Like I'm excited about all that. But so I worked in radio for 10 years with the idea in radio of it always being driven around sports. Like I wanted to do play-by-play. I did some color commentary and stuff for the Owen Sound Attack on the road. I hosted their games on TV when I worked up there for a few years. So it was always sports driven. And then I got let go from the radio station in February of 2012 with not much experience of anything other than being able to talk. And you're kind of like, oh, what am I going to do with? I got nothing. But so then I got involved more on the team side. So I was lucky enough to work with the Windsor Express for a few years. We won 2 championships there. And then I had a chance to start out with Amherstburg Admirals, just kind of volunteering with them and helping out on game days and stuff. Because I've always been drawn to the ability to build teams and how different that is in every environment or situation or individual that's involved. You take one piece out of each thing. You change Amherstburg from junior C to junior B. Just changing that letter changes a lot. You move the team from Amherstburg to a different town. That has a lot of impact on it too, and how you build a team. So just those little things have always interested me. And then, I was fortunate enough to work with Lakeshore, and Justin Soltz was the head coach. After
back in the day,
he had gone off to Leamington, I had reached out to him and asked if there was anything I could do to help. And fortunately enough, he was looking for somebody to help. So that's now 6 seasons ago. And the coach's site was somewhat similar in the sense that I'd always enjoyed what Aaron and his team had put together. Glass and Out podcast is fantastic, and I just cold emailed Aaron and had said, I'd always enjoyed your content. Has anybody ever interviewed you about the things that you've learned as a host of a podcast with some of the biggest names in hockey coaching history? And I had some background in media. I've been able to hopefully this is something we can connect on. They ended up being interested in doing so, and so we kind of connected on what that would look like, because they didn't want it to look like Aaron just, I've talked to Scotty Bowman and I've had all these guys, and Aaron enough is the most modest guy in the room most of the time. So we ended up doing that recording of that podcast. Still tell the story to this day that he's in BC, or they operate out of BC. I'm in Windsor, obviously. And when we were recording, it was like the sky was black. Like, I don't know what was rolling in storm-wise, but I just sat there the whole time thinking, God, if my power goes out at any point, the whole thing's funny. Blown. Like, forget it. This guy, he lives in the mountains, doesn't have internet. Forget this guy. But it went really well. He had asked if I had ever done any writing and stuff like that. And he had said, we have this idea that we wanted to do more of a deep dive into some of the best hockey organizations around the world. And we're looking for somebody to do it. So not to say it fell in my lap, but the opportunity just kind of came out of reaching out and a cold call to Aaron. And now this is our 3rd season that we've done this. We've done 12, working on 13 so far. And it truly is the best experience I've had involved in sport or hockey or anything.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I want to get into like a lot of that team stuff for sure. But you're saying you've always been kind of drawn to the process, like building teams. And is that something that you found specifically with sport, or just teams in general, like organizations, businesses? Is it specific to sport, or do you have interest outside of that as well?
It had always started with sports, but I've seen it now in just everyday life, like in a business, in a family, what that kind of dynamic looks like, and just how number one, everybody, and watching it as a fan, but also now having some experience of being able to be behind the curtain, so to speak. I'm a big Detroit Tigers fan. Baseball was my first love, and I'd gotten into it from was probably 3 or 4 years old. So like, it's one thing to watch how they build a major league team, and then they also have a farm system, and it all kind of flows together, and everybody's impatient and wants it to happen now. And so did I. But now that I've kind of seen how teams built, it's kind of changed my view of that in how much work goes into something that has nothing to do with the actual on-field or on-ice product. There's so much that happens behind the scenes that if this doesn't work, and that's kind of what we'll get into tonight, but if this doesn't work, the on ice, on field doesn't stand a chance.
Yeah, that's something I'm learning for sure. Like going through, I mean, you've had more or less a front row seat. Like, have you traveled to a lot of these places that you've talked to, or is it mostly like
not,
remote?
No, that I've mostly just been on Zoom calls and stuff like that. So
you've had like a figurative front row seat to a lot of these like hockey factories. So maybe just run through quick, like list some of the big names that you've kind of investigated, some of the people you've talked to, and we can kind of go through. And I'm going to ask you a whole bunch of questions on this kind of stuff. Getting the details is what I find interesting, because that's something that everybody pays attention to, kind of like the product, the outcome, but it's very easy to overlook a lot of the little things that go into building these things. Like, I'm just noticing in Ontario, like it takes 3 people here to just keep up with, like, what does Hockey Canada say? What does the OHF say? What does the OMHA say? How do we make sure our rosters are set? How do we make sure we have travel permits? How do we make sure, like, all of these little things that nobody even realizes are things? So I guess, what are some of the things, or some of the top places that, or even just some of your favorites that you got to interview and really dive into? And maybe what were some of the things that, I guess, what were some of the things you expected to maybe hear versus what are some of the things maybe you're surprised to hear?
Yeah, I think the most interesting part of that, and the two pieces of what Hockey Factories is, or what I hope it to be, is to learn from the best programs in the world and what they do, and where they think their separators are, but to also find it. And I think this has kind of happened organically in talking to these clubs, is how relatable what they're doing is, that truly can be done anywhere. Roger, I'll jump ahead, but Roger Romberg, who's the first team head coach at Frölunda in Sweden, which is one of the ones that we've focused on, one of his lines, or one of his missions for his staff, is to be number one at everything that's free. And that's the New York Yankees, right? Like, that's, Frölunda is about as big as it gets in Europe. And this guy's trying to find the best way to do things for free. And that's communicating. That's making sure that everybody's on the same page, alignment stuff, all of that. And it's no different than what happens at BioSteel. It's no different than what could happen in a single A or triple A club in Ontario or Windsor or anything like that, right? So I guess finding those two dynamics and seeing them kind of blend together has been really one of the more interesting parts of this. But we've done Frölunda in Sweden. We've done Jokerit, Jungalder Mannheim in Germany. We've done Luleå, the women's program in Sweden. We've done Djurgården. Shattuck St. Mary's was the first one, which, what a way to start. And then the Dallas Stars Elite program. We've done Zug. We've done Notre Dame, the Okanagan Hockey Academy. There's one or two in there that I'm missing that's going to bother me.
Yeah.
The rest of it, I may just drop a name in there as we go.
Right.
But and even the last one we just did that just came out not that long ago was the Hermantown in Minnesota. So very different settings in all of them too, which was what we were hoping for. You get to see some of the dynamics between Canada and the US and North America and Europe and Sweden and Finland, and how all those kind of relate to each other and how different they are. But also there's key components that, now having done 12, working on 13 of these, that are in every single one of these articles. Like, they all kind of take on a life of their own. There's all kind of an angle or a feature that gets emphasized in the article, but really the basis of these clubs, they all have 2 or 3 really key components that work for all of them.
Yeah. So a couple cool things there. So you talk about being the best at things that are free. That's like a highlight thing that I really like, because I remember hearing you chat about that as well, which I thought was cool. But then you mentioned alignment. When you're talking about, let's say, I would imagine more like an organizational alignment type of thing. What exactly do you mean by that? Because this is something that I've noticed locally at least like in the organizations that we're most familiar with, is like there's a lot of disjointed um, setups. So for example, like if I'm the head coach of my U13 team, I have no idea what the U16 coach is doing. I have no idea what the U10 coach is doing. I might not even have that guy's email. I might, right? And so that's kind of where my mind goes when you're talking about that. When you're saying alignment, what does that actually mean? And is that something that's consistent through the different organizations that you've looked into, or does alignment mean something different depending on what organization we're talking about?
I think you've hit the nail on the head with that for sure. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we see with organizations, and just being specific to Windsor, Ontario, however far you want to go with that. And by no fault of the coach, it's real easy in the grind of a season as a U13 head coach, like you used as an example, to be worried about the U13 team, and we've got a tournament coming up this weekend, and we've lost a couple of games, and this kid's sick, and this parent's bothering me, and it's easy to silo yourself. But with alignment means U10 to U18 or whatever your program looks like. You're using the same verbiage, you're explaining the same drills, maybe your system is exactly the same. Every coach is in sync with what the other coaches are doing, because what you'll find in very easily and right off the beginning of the year, September seems to be a reteaching month for a lot of programs, because the U12 coach may do something with their breakout or with their neutral zone or whatever, and the U13 coach gets them, and the reaction either is, number one, what the hell have these kids learned, or why can't they understand our system? This is our system, but it's not. If they've never seen it before and they don't know when you say wheel, what that means, or when you have a specific term for, a neutral zone dump or crossing corner or something like that, if they don't know what that means, of course, that's no fault of the kid. That's no fault of the coach. Realistically, that's an organizational problem. So instead of losing September to reteaching, if you've got September to reaffirm what they've learned for the 2 or 3 years before in that, and now you're just adding pieces to it because your U13 coach is a really good skating coach, and he's excellent with ABC. And when you come through the organization, when you get to this year, he is going to put your kid's going to be able to fly when you're done with them. And you've explained that, and you've built that out as an organization. The parents know what's going on when their kid's going through that process. That's why practice looks like this, because he's specifically skilled at teaching skating. He's going to get into everything else, but the first year you're learning how to skate backwards. Second year you're learning how to pass. You've got it kind of broken down. Jokerit has always used this as their kind of example, and that's why I kind of go back to them quite a bit, is they teach in the 4 quadrants at the beginning of youth hockey. The first year they will talk about playing offense with the puck. The second year they'll talk about playing offense without the puck. Then it's defending the puck carrier, then it's defending non-puck carrier. And so every year, the first few years that you're in that program, you win 7-1, you lose 7-1. The conversations you're having after that are, how did we do playing offense with the puck? Did we create space for the puck carrier? Did we create space so we could get open for the puck carrier? They're much more in Europe compared to North America, and it's a different runway, so it's not apples to apples, but they're much more deliberate with how they teach the game along the way, as opposed to trying to give kids everything every year. The comparison that I've used for that, my daughter's in grade 4, like she's not learning everything. She's learning what's the grade 4 curriculum. So in grade 5, she will build on what she learned in grade 4 and in grade 6 and so on and so forth, where I feel like, and this is where it kind of gets, you could go into any number of angles, whether it's parental pressures or the cost of playing or the limited ice time or whatever that looks like. We tend to want to throw everything at these kids all at once, because at the end of the year, we want to say, well, look, we taught them forecheck, back check. We look at this kid's, I know my capacity to learn all that stuff isn't that great, and I'm 43. Imagine an 11-year-old. They wouldn't be able to process that.
Yeah, and but like that's one of my frustrations is things are so, at least in our area, with most of the places that I'm familiar with, is they're looking for that result when they're young, and like the outcomes are so important, and like exactly what you said, whether you win 7-1 or lose 7-1, we're talking about this. Like this is what our focus is. And that consistency of messaging, whether we are winning or losing, you actually can kind of stick to a plan now. And like there's so many different parallels. Like the education system is a great one. When you show up for grade 5 math, you spend the first little bit reviewing grade 4 math, and then you move on. I don't have to reteach grade 4 math my way. Right? It's like we can just take the next step.
Yep. And they're not teaching you all a calculus
exactly
in grade 5. It's okay as you get further on in the year, and that U13 window is a great one when it starts becoming, we're starting to introduce body checking and all that. Like you can teach that early. You can show them what that looks like. You don't have to give them the whole thing, but here's something to get ready for. And that's where we go back to alignment and with coaches. Like when you talk about things we can do for free or things that are easy for organizations to do, I ask organizations that I've talked to, how many times has your U14 coach ran a U12 practice? How many times has your U12s skated with your U14s? Like if you're not blending that together, because that's the extra benefit to that is you're creating the culture in the community that, in the world of open borders and what this is going to look like over the next couple of years, it's going to be harder and harder for organizations to do that. But if you're able to, as an organization, lay out to a parent, this is, from U10 to U18, this is what your child's experience is going to look like. They're going to learn this along the way, because bam, when it's draft year, we've already got all this stuff. We've had a whole year in doing this as opposed to 8 things a year every year. And you're able to really build a culture around what your organization is. I think if anything else, one of the biggest takeaways from that is European clubs, North American clubs, whatever it is, the clubs that do it right, the name on the front is the ultimate decider. At Frölunda, like Frölunda is Frölunda. The U13 coach is not Frölunda. Like the U13 coach is coming into Frölunda to teach what Frölunda teaches, not the other way around. Where if you got an organization that has 8 different age groups, you don't have 8 different teams. You've got one organization with 8 coaches that are teaching your philosophy.
Yeah, and it allows. The reason I love that is because it allows coaches to be able to take a breath and not have to address the most pressing issue right now necessarily, right? So from a development standpoint, if there's a deficiency that pops up, like you go to whatever tournament and you get smacked, whatever, and the parent complaint is, well, we don't have a great neutral zone. It's like you can find comfort in the fact that we're sticking to a curriculum, we're sticking to a system. It's not about the neutral zone, man. Like, and they will all know that because they have been educated on that before they join the program. Where now, like, man, you get the heat from some parents, and it's really easy to feel that pressure and feel like you have to jump and cater to that thing right now. And when you're not in a system like that, it makes it really challenging because everything kind of starts and stops with you as the head coach, for example, and there's not really anything outside of your team. It's just your team is the system. I have you for maybe 12 months, maybe. And when you really break that down, maybe it's only 8 months that you're seriously influencing them. And with a 12-year-old, like over 8 months, there's a lot of development, but in the grand scheme of their progression as an athlete in general, not even just a hockey player, so much needs to happen that is not in your control. You might have them for 3 hours a week for practices,
and that's just
like,
it.
And so
great point.
So with all that kind of said, like when you're looking at some of these places that you would deem and are not just you, they're kind of objectively the best of the best in development factories. What are some of these pillars you're talking about? Like, what are some of these consistent things that you see specifically that you could bring into any organization that could really translate? Because one of the things that I find interesting, I'm actually interested to hear what you say about this, is if you go to a club style system that would be more typical of Europe, where it's like from young to old, it's like soccer over there, right? So it's like you're here. Like I had a kid come over here from Norway a few years ago, and he was in Lillehammer in was it Norway? Is Lillehammer Norway? So his goal was, I want to play on the Lillehammer pro team.
Oh yeah,
like, that's what his goal was in life.
It. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's neat.
So he was from a kid at the time. He's a kid. He's playing for the Lillehammer junior team. He's playing for the youth team, and that's his goal. Is like, I want to play for that pro team. And then you come to some of the situations we have over here, where, especially like you said with the open borders, kids can be jumping around and all that stuff. But even without that, once you hit like 15 or 16, you might be like, well, it's time to jump to Toronto. It's time to jump to Michigan, where it's really strong AAA hockey. Then I'm going to jump to a junior team after that. And then I'm going to jump from that junior team to another junior team. And then I'm going to go from the OJHL to now it could be the OHL. Maybe it's going to be the NCAA. And there's so many different influences. So you don't have that common thread of time with your organization. So considering those differences, like, what are some of those key things that you see maybe that are kind of consistent despite like those differences?
Yeah. First off on that, and that's 100%. And one of the things that I've really grown to admire about Europe and the way that is set up. And again, when we talked about the longer runway, ultimately Frölunda, and we'll again use just Frölunda as an example, like they want players to play on their first team. That's their goal, their mission. Most of the time, the mandate is the first team's got to be 50%. Made up of 50% of the kids that have come through that program, because it's expensive to get imports and find imports that can play at that level, and you got to reteach them the system where you've taught this kid for 15, 20 years what the system is, right? So it's easier for them to do, and they get more return on their investment. They talk about we want this guy, if this kid doesn't make it on the first team, maybe he runs a business one day and he wants to sponsor the club. Maybe he has a kid that says, oh, we had a great experience at Frölunda. My dad played at Frölunda. I want to play at Frölunda. Where, like you said, here it's a rat race to get to the draft year, and we lose kids in enrollment and involvement if they don't get drafted, because we don't do a good job. I say this in Ontario, Canada in general, a great job of explaining what other options are for kids other than, did you get picked at the OHL draft? Right. You didn't? It's probably the end of the road, pal. I don't know. That dream is dead, right?
Yeah.
Where ultimately, end of the day, and I've had these conversations with NHL coaches too, of like, when do you want this kid to be able to click on all cylinders? Like, they are playing the best hockey they've ever had to be at the NHL level. And the age that I hear is 26. So at 15, if we're not educating these kids on, like, you may have another decade before you're really got to be in, it's different, right?
Yeah, that's interesting. So for I was just curious about that over there. Here, because we have kids that jump around so much, can they leave? Or are there situations where kids jump around from club to club?
There is, for sure there is. And interestingly enough, Jokerit is a perfect example of it. Like, the first team over there, that's real hockey. Like, when you're playing the KHL and stuff like that might be the second best league in the world.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So, you go through the Jokerit program, U20 is the last year that you're with them. It's not easy for a 19-year-old to make a jump to a first team. So sometimes they do have to go play in a junior level, or they come to North America or something like that. But ultimately, they're trying to pull them back to play in their first team. So you do see some jumping around a lot in that too. Zug was interesting in Switzerland because the way they're set up in their country is almost like states, in that you can't play outside of your particular border unless you go to the federation and all this stuff that happens. So some you're kind of limited to where you are, but there is still some jumping around in there for sure. I think it's like, I'll talk glowingly about how Europe does things, but it's not the be all end all. But it's an interesting comparison between the two. But back to your original question there about some of the things that these programs do together, and I learned this in the first one that we did with Shattuck St. Mary's, and it checks the box every single time along, is the be all end all of this is the coaches. If the coaches are not on the same page, if they're not teaching what the organization wants taught or how they're going to educate the kids, connect with the kids, all of that, then it's all for naught. And the hard part for any organization is like, most of the time these are all volunteers. Like they're one of the kids' dads, or they're somebody that's been involved that wants to give back to their community, that has some hockey experience. So like when we say that all the pressure's on the coach's shoulders, and you kind of use the example of you're on the road, you have a bad tournament, and the parents are coming to you, like it's not easy being a coach in minor hockey, and it's not getting any easier. But there's also a lot of expectation that comes with it, right? So if anything else, and the easiest thing that an organization can do is to simply provide a roadmap for the coaches, that end of the year, this is what we expect of you, that your kids are able to understand, because when they go into next year, this is where we're starting. We're not going back and reteaching again. This is where we're starting. So it helps organizations be able to evaluate their coaches, because if they notice 10 of the 15 players aren't there, then that may have been a problem with the coach. It also gives the coach an opportunity to have some freedom in how they're going to teach it, but know what the end game is. And also use, not to say as a buffer or a mediator, but to also be able to use the organization to support them when they're getting cornered because the parent didn't like that they played this kid more than my kid, or we had a terrible tournament, these kids don't know what I passed. And you're following a mandate. It's not you've just created this system. This is an organizational decision.
Yeah, we're so not used to that over here.
Right,
Isn't
not
it
at
crazy?
all.
That's so, and that's one thing that I try to sell that a lot when we're talking to parents, is that you are being coached by a network. You're not being coached by one individual. And so I want to stick on the coaching thing for a second, because I guess to you, from the conversations you've had, the research you've done, what does it mean to be a good coach? Because like from my perspective, and when I hear, I have to talk to so many parents on the daily, and what they say without being explicit about it, their expectations of a coach almost doesn't match what's necessarily appropriate, or they don't account for what might actually be appropriate. So like if some guy checks a box that he coached in X league for X team, it's like, oh, that's the shiny toy that we want. And that might not be the right thing for a U12 team, So when from these, you used coaching as the first pillar, and this is not that it's necessarily number one, it's just the first thing you mentioned, but I would say the same thing of the coach. The coach is super, super important, but maybe not for the reason that people think in terms of a credential or something like that. So what does that look 100%. Like from what you know?
Yeah, and interesting. So the Arizona Junior Coyotes was one that we did that I didn't mention earlier.
Gotcha.
So they're starting to come through. But such an interesting place in the world, because it's basically, as they've deemed it themselves, the retirement home of NHL players. So like when you look at their coaching list on their website, I mean, there's 6, 7, 8 guys that NHL experience that are on that team. And there's some coaches that have been there with NHL experience that it just wasn't a good fit. So yeah, it doesn't necessarily have to be credentials that you're chasing, just like it doesn't have to be banners that you're chasing every year. It's somebody who can, number one, they've got to show that they care for the kids. You have to. There's a great psychologist. Her name is Dr. Jody Carrington. She presented at the Coaches Site Live a couple years ago. One of the best presentations I've seen in the ones that have been there. Her line that she's got is, you'll never realize how fast you can make a kid skate when you know the name of their dog. Like, and it's so true. If spending time with the kid to know what are they struggling at school, what are their brothers and sisters' names when they're older, what are their parents like, do they have a boyfriend, a girlfriend, what's that dynamic look like? Really truly show that you care about the kid, as opposed to it, and again, you're looking for the best for this kid. I think the other thing that we do in Canada specifically, as a reflection of how Europe looks at us, I've kind of come up with the saying or the idea of that we spend 95% of our time on 5% of our kids. We're not looking to develop all 17, 20 players on our team. we've got a couple of really special kids that we're able to push through that get drafted really high or whatever it is, and we hang our hat on that as a success. There's a lot of people that are spending a lot of money to put their kid in that are never going to play a professional hockey game, that might be doctors and might be lawyers and might own businesses and whatever, that should and deserve the exact same type of treatment. Jung Alder Mannheim in Germany kind of uses this as an example, and Hermantown's the same thing. In like that's a small community that hockey is probably 4th or 5th on the popular sport list. So they don't have another kid that they can just grab, right? They've got to develop everybody, because if you've got 500 kids that come out to learn how to skate, when you get to your first team, that might be 8 kids. It might be, something like that. So you don't have a choice. You've got to develop everybody, because you also don't know who at 12 or 15 or whatever, the light's going to turn on and that kid's going to take off. Where I think we kind of fall into a trap again where, and I've, my little guy's 7. He played U9 this year as a goalie. Kids are being identified. He's a good player. He's a great one. Like they're not good players. They're 7, 8 years old. Yeah. Like they're fine for what they are, but in most cases it's a breakaway contest. So like what skill are they picking up that they're going to learn next year? And it's kind of, okay, I see what you mean. But that's to me, that's where we kind of go wrong in that, and making sure that we're taking care of everybody. But another important thing for the coach when we talk about that player, parent, coach dynamic, and that realistically, that's a triangle. Like there's no, if one piece of that's missing, the whole thing's falling down. So you have to be, as a coach, you have to be crystal clear with your communication, not just with your players, but with your parents. They have to know what your mandate is, what your expectation is of your kid, of your team as a program, because kind of like you said, if you leave it up to translation, you're going to get 17 different translations. All of them are going to benefit the person that's doing the translating, or they're going to find the way that this is going to work best for their kid, and no one is going to be happy. And so as much as we roll our eyes when we talk about parents in general, and the vast majority of them are not the reason that we roll our eyes. If we exclude them from this conversation and we kind of put blinders on, and this is my team when they're here and this and that, it's real easy for them to plant a seed in their own head and translate what you're doing a different way. And if it's not to the immediate benefit of their own kid and the money that they're spending, it's going to be ugly.
Yeah. Well, that's one thing that is funny with us is it doesn't matter what we talk about. We get like pushback from both sides on whatever we talk about. But when we're carving up the parents, people love to hear like the crazy parent story and all this stuff.
Yeah.
But there is just as much, which I think we try to do as balanced a job as we can, is poking at the coaches too, of like, you can't have an ego, man. Like how many coaches are just like, I have a no parent talk policy. Like I go through the play. It's like, they're kids, man. They're kids. If they're pros and it's their job, okay. Like, yeah, you talk to the player, like you don't have to call mom, but for these kids, they are kids, they don't have the maturity or the skills to engage with the coach and effectively understand what you're saying all the time.
Exactly.
So there's tons of blame, if you want to say blame, to put on coaches for these situations too. That's a good like visual is that triangle thing, right? You 100%. Need to have all 3 pieces of it.
If you're just like you said, if it's this is my team and the 4 hours that I have them this week, I'm going to teach them, and to hell with the people that are in the crowd, you're going to lose that team because you're going to lose the parents. And again, I use my little guy as an example all the time because I'm kind of starting to live the experience. Like, he's 7. He played up this year, so everybody else on that team is 8. Like, yeah, do I tell him that if he wants something that he should learn how to ask for it and have those conversations with an adult? 1,000,000%. But I don't expect the coach to come to him and explain why he's playing and why he's not. That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, exactly.
But so if you're not having that conversation as a coach, then you're doing a disservice to the player that's in that locker room and the parent. And there's a lot of reverberation around that other parents will see too. if I'm spending time talking to your kid and coaching him through, we're working on this, or maybe you could do this better, or whatever it is on the bench or in practice or afterwards, but you're not talking to this person's kid, they translate that too. And there's nothing, that's not a knock on anybody. That's just simply what you see because you're not connected. But if you're connected, if you're explaining, if again, when you have your parent meetings, when you do your parent surveys and things like that, like, you have got to be crystal clear of what this expectation is going to be, because you can use that to your own benefit when you say, listen, I told you at the beginning of the year, when we go to tournaments, we're playing the players that are working the best, we're rewarding our ice time at tournaments. It's not going to be 50-50-50 all the way through. We talked about that at the beginning of the year. If you don't have that conversation, man, God bless you, because no matter what you do, it's not, somebody is going to be offended by it. And that's not going to smooth everything over, but it at least gives you some help as a coach to be able to guide through a year. Again, I'll use my little guy as an example. He played goalie, 7-year-old, first time ever as a goalie playing U9. I told him, listen, if you want to do this, it's not going to be pretty. We're learning this year. We're not losing, because it's not going to go well at the beginning. You're learning the position, all this stuff. And his coach did a fantastic job of talking to me about, hey, when we go to a tournament, we've got to play to win. I'm going to try to get him in, but it is what it is. And maybe he's fortunate because of the experience that I have, that I want to pay. But my only thing to him was, you got to tell him. As long as he knows, because then when I get him in the car and I ask him what coach said, and he's able to relay to me, coach said he's going to play me on this game and this game. Okay, well, now we've set an expectation, right? If it's any different than that, I can have that conversation, or we can have that conversation, the three of us. But I think as much as, and you're 100% right, as much as we love, or it's easy to talk about the crazy parents, the coaches in a lot of situations don't help themselves. Have you seen we see the videos of the parents fighting in the crowd, or the guy that goes on the ice that punches a referee, and like, that's listen, that's his own problem, right? That's far beyond hockey. For sure. But it also just gives you a second to kind of flip back to say, is everything okay here in this group, with this coaching staff, with these players, with this parent group, that if everybody's kind of kosher, I don't know that happens other than, an extreme case. Yeah, for sure. That's one that the communication is, like, that's the number one pillar for me from a coaching perspective. Even like the appearance of things not being transparent, even if they are, just the fact that you haven't communicated a process, and even if you have nothing to hide and you're not trying to hide anything, people, like you said about translation, it gets lost in translation. People say one thing or they heard another thing, and because you're not clearing it up, it can really muddy the waters with the group and just cause conflict. And that's what can make it really difficult to focus on something like development, because now the parents are looking for things that they can pick on, and they don't necessarily care about the day-to-day stuff anymore. Now they're just focused on the outcome. And it's crazy, because there's so many parents that even if their team is winning, it's all conflict. Oh, completely. And so it's very interesting. Yeah, and that's a personality thing. Look, you're never going to escape that at work, at home, at hockey, whatever it looks like. But and I've got a coach that I'd worked with that's in Eastern Ontario. When his parent meeting at the beginning of the year, and I've been doing this for years, and most of the time it works, so I keep doing it. Whenever it is, the parent meeting at the beginning of the year says, I will never talk to somebody about my practices. At the end of the year, this is what this team is going to look like. This is what they're going to learn. Some of our practices, we're going to be standing around for a long time. Some of them we're just going to be skating in circles. Some we might be kicking a soccer ball around on skates. I'll never answer questions about my practice, because that's my practice. Now, is that the right way to explain it? Probably not. But is there something else that you can give them of, hey, we're going to be playing soccer in this practice because it helps with ABC? Do we have to detail what our practices plans look like? Absolutely not. But there's a happy medium in there that it's not necessarily going to make everybody happy, but at least aware of what they're going to expect.
They want to be feel informed.
For sure.
That's part of it,
For
right?
sure. I think one thing that's easy for us to escape from and in that is like, this is an expensive game. It's expensive, man. So if I'm dropping $5,000, $10,000, keep going. The least you owe me as a parent of the kid that you're coaching is tell me what the hell's going on. Like that's bare minimum expectation. So if you're going in, like we had said, of the example of the coach, that's this is our room, this is our team. I don't take questions if you got a problem, whatever. Like you're not doing a service to anybody that's there.
Yeah. So for these organizations, then going back to kind of like the pillars of what makes them, or those common threads that a lot of these really successful places have, coaches being one, that would be something that you find with the coaches, that they're kind of following this model that we're talking about, where
Very
it's
much
like
so.
clearly defined expectations. This is what you can expect, and all of that stuff would be like par for the course with a lot of these places.
Right. And that comes from the organizations themselves. So again, like whatever that board looks like, that board is kind of put together a mandate of expectations of the coach that are measurable things that coach can use to form their practices, to have those conversations with parents. It's very top heavy, which I think organizations that we are kind of using as an example leave that power to the coach and aren't kind of the ones that are steering the boat. And that's where, and maybe they have the benefit of history and legacy with some of these places, but that's where like it's a model. Like in Hermantown, when you play it's a community-based hockey. So if you live in Hermantown, you go to school to Hermantown, you play Hermantown hockey. They play one system. They teach you one system all the way to high school. You play high school hockey. It's the same system all the way through. And that's Hermantown hockey. There's other towns all over the state of Minnesota that will teach you a completely different way of playing it. But Hermantown teaches you this. So if the coach doesn't fit that, then maybe it's the coach and not the organization, because the organization's made it very clear what this is going to look like. Where I think where we fall behind is we leave that or give that power to the volunteer coach to run his team, and then he's the one left holding the bag if things go wrong.
Yeah. Especially when, like you said, a lot of time it is volunteers or people that don't have experience or they don't have the knowledge. I feel like it's really important to try to have some kind of frame that they can plug into or follow.
Absolutely.
When they don't have a lot of those resources, right?
Yeah.
So aside from the coaching stuff, what are some of the other things you see as kind of like the big pillars that make these places successful?
We talked about the communication part of things too, and that's again such a big part of that too. I think the other part of it that has always kind of stood out with that is not necessarily a club identity, but more of a big picture look of what we're really doing here. It's easy to get caught up in winning a banner or having a kid that gets drafted or something like that. But like we talked about the coach with the shiny toys and stuff. If your organization is just trying to provide the best experience possible for the kids that are all the kids that are enrolled in that, when that starts to matter is a very different age than when we think it does. So if anything as well, I think what they're able to do or how they're able to establish what that looks like is to take that step back and you realize that hockey is the vehicle to the life lessons that these kids are being taught throughout the time. If you end up getting some kids that roll through that are NHL draft picks, like we did Djurgården, that had 5 kids get drafted in the NHL in 2 years, all 5 of them in the first round, not that long ago. Like that hadn't happened for them in a long time. But is that necessarily a flash in the pan, or is that just simply again, we develop everybody, we see what comes out at the end, and there's going to be special kids that come through that are just really, really good hockey players that are able to make that jump. So I think, again, from an organizational level, they know what their responsibility is of teaching the kids the life lessons that they're going to use throughout the day and putting that first, as opposed to some programs that we'd see all over the world that their selling feature is they've won 7 of the last 10 years. And you know, are again much more specific with how they're teaching the game, as opposed to you know, we're our goal is to win the championship this year. Well, if you win the championship, that's great, but there's probably half a dozen kids on that team that didn't get the greatest experience because they sat on the bench on that last game most of the time.
Yeah, for sure. So when you look at these different places, how much do finances play a role in the organization's ability to do these things? So if you're looking at something as prestigious as Shattuck, for example, and then I wouldn't even know of the organizations you've listed, like what would be the opposite of Shattuck in terms of their financial capabilities. Are they still able to put this together, or is this something that has to cost like a lot of money? Or if you can only do some pieces of it, where would it be best to focus those resources? Like how much of that is a factor in the organizational ability to build this kind of system that we're talking about?
It is, for sure. I mean, you know, some of these clubs in Europe that we've had a chance to kind of focus on, and not just Europe, in North America as well, like you know, the difference, like we've talked about now a couple of times, like volunteer coach to full-time coach. And some of these programs, a U13 coach, that's a full-time job. Like that's a full salary. That's, you know, that is their job. Where here, I mean, we pay for gas money, and that's it, right?
Right, yeah.
So there's a big difference in that. But ultimately, I think what those core things are when we talk about our organizations being aligned, that is the easiest, freest thing that you can possibly do. Whether we're asking more time of our volunteer coaches to come to a meeting a month or sit on a Zoom call or something like that, sure, there's the exchange of time. But realistically, there's nothing from the foundation and definition of what it is. There's nothing that Jokerit in Finland is doing that AAA Center in Windsor can do, or can't do, I should say, when it comes to being on the same page and aligned within their organization. So number one, like you're starting out a brand new organization, or you're taking over an organization and you're starting to build it from the ground up, that foundational piece is everybody is aligned. We all understand. Again, whether you're using the same verbiage, whether you're using this and that is up to you, however you want to do it. But if as an organization, if you're teaching one thing and I'm teaching another thing, and I don't know what you're teaching and you don't know what I'm teaching, it might work at some point down the line, but you're probably going to get more credit to the special player than it is how you got them there.
Mm-hmm. So if you look at some of these different places, like I guess my thing would be, if you, like you, Matt, are walking into an organization and you're saying like, there's some problems here. Are you going, like, your first step is checking, are things aligned top to bottom from team 1 to team 7 or whatever it is? Is that like your number one step to make an adjustment in an organization to maybe put them on a path towards these more successful organizations?
That's my number one. That's the first thing. Like if I were called into an organization as a consultant or whatever that looks like, of like, hey, we're in big trouble here. Like our parent system is a mess. Our players, you know, we lose all the time. Our coaches are this. Like the first thing to pull back when you're looking at that is, how do you as an organization communicate to your coaches? What is that? Are you meeting every month? Are you sending out newsletters? Do you like, what's your coach's expectation of the organization, and what's your organization's expectation of the coach? Because if those two don't match, nothing is going to come together at that point. So to me, yeah, alignment is the biggest part of that. And I've used when I did the presentation in St. Andrews, like I used the different examples of what alignment looks like, and obviously being in an auto center like we are in Windsor, like that to me is the easiest one. Like the guy down the street at Chrysler or GM, like he's not building a car, he's putting the steering wheel in, or he's installing this or that. So I mean, if he puts the steering wheel in wrong, does it destroy the car? Like it may, but if he also doesn't know what is coming to him and where it's going afterwards, then it's not a car I want to drive. Yeah. So if that's not for me, again, like alignment within the organization is number one. That's the first place that I would look. And when we talk about things that, yeah, there's obviously a bigger budget at Jungalder Mannheim in Germany than there is at Riverside or LaSalle or Windsor AAA or whatever it is, but that doesn't cost anything.
Yeah. So if we kind of shift a little bit more to like the player side of it now, or the athlete side of it, are there anything that, or any kind of patterns you've noticed with some of these organizations in terms of expectations on players, or like non-negotiable traits, or anything about the way that they are actually interacting with the players that's super notable to you?
Yeah. Again, when you're touching base with your players and being aware of where your player is mentally and physically, and we did in Zug in Switzerland, they have this place called OM, which it's OYM, if you get a chance to Google it, it's an epicenter to just the sleep studies and nutrition studies and all that. And it's starting to come all the way across. Like I've now done a few after that, and the programs afterwards are starting to work into that a little bit more too. So what does that mean for the player? I think the expectation the organization should have of the player is at least awareness of what that looks like, and how they're managing their body, how they're managing their mind, how they're managing their sleep, all of those different things to kind of align with what the organization, what the coach is teaching them. I think the one thing too that I've noticed that's missing, or I'm hearing from organizations that's missing, is hockey IQ. We are in a world now that there is a skills coach for everything, and they don't necessarily communicate, and they certainly don't work with the organizations and this and that. So that's one thing that I've noticed too. That's a real. It's going to become more of a focus. I feel like in the next couple of years to bring that part of the game back. It's great that you can dangle 1-on-4, but if you end up in a corner and you don't know what to do, you don't know where to look, you don't know who's open, who's on this, then again, what have we really accomplished? It's only a piece of the puzzle. So you're seeing that start to become something that's focused on a lot more. And the other thing too that I use baseball as an example, is versatility. We're really starting to see, especially in some of the European programs, like we're playing 5 guys on the ice. We're not playing 2 defensemen and 3 forwards. There is a lot of, the defenseman goes up and now maybe he finishes the shift as the left wing, and we all, like, there's a lot of diversity in the player. So those are 2 real aspects of the hockey IQ and the versatility that I think players now should start trying to find ways to implement into their games.
Yeah. And then do you ever hear, or is there any piece of conversation talking about balance for the athletes in terms of like early specialization? Like this is kind of like a hot topic now too. So like all of this, like someone listening to this could be like, oh, this is serious, like this is like a serious,
yeah.
Like we're talking about a serious operation.
Mm-hmm.
And like from my perspective, those 2 things don't have to be at odds. Like you can have a very well run program and still keep balance with the athletes to make sure that when they're 9, they don't get a hernia because all they do is skate. Like, so is that ever worked into any of the conversations? What have you heard about that with some of these organizations? Do they do anything actively to kind of account for that or try to address that topic?
Yeah. And some of the programs that I've seen in Europe and North America are almost forcing multi-sport. So I know Jungalder Mannheim was an example of this. Zug's been an example of this. Like some of their practices when the weather turns they're playing ultimate frisbee. Like they're not going on the ice at all. Because you're learning so many different things, and I think there's enough research out there now that you see why being able to play tennis helps you as a hockey player, and why being able to play soccer can help you as a cricket player, or there's a lot that's kind of weaving into it. So I think that's one thing that we're also trying to preach with just in general with organizations is just that is to look further down the road, that if they work their butt off at U11 and you've got them working with a skills coach and you've got, you're on the ice 4 times them, and like the burnout of kids is very, very real. And I think it's just something that we're starting to really acknowledge. So yeah, like there's space in that for sure. Some of the programs, like I did Notre Dame, Okanagan Hockey Academy, both of them in Canada, like it's an academy system. So they're in school there, they live there. Like some of their school practices are simply just going outside and doing something else. They put the sticks and bags away and they're working on this, or they're doing meditation in one of their classes as opposed to going on the ice or cutting it back in that kind of sense. So I think we're kind of having to force introduction to that to our kids, that multisport is a good thing, especially early on, because we're not creating robots here. We're trying to teach kids how to be hockey players. So, at 11, does it serve a kid better to be playing soccer in the summer as opposed to also doing 3 skates a week in the summer? I mean, it's starting to become very obvious that that's not a beneficial way to do things.
It does feel like we're a little behind the I guess the cutting edge of where research is at and that stuff, at least in our area, where it's not really just a given that, hey, this is too much. It's like, and so with a lot of these programs, I want to make sure kind of that point is clear. Well, first I want to clarify that they do account for this kind of stuff, but make sure it's clear that people understand just because you have a well organized program specific to hockey, that doesn't mean it has to translate to all you ever do is hockey, all you ever think about is hockey, and any of that kind of thing, right?
For sure. And that's where academics plays in with some of these places as well, just as much as anything else. I mean, Okanagan was a great example of that. Mike Needham, who's the director out there, like he's kept his best player home in championship tournaments because he got a call from his teacher and he had missed school the last 3 days. And why weren't you at school? Well, I was getting ready for the tournament. Well, I mean, you're 16 years old. Does the 3 days that you were in school matter a little bit more than the tournament that's not really going to matter at all, or what, right? So it's almost implied in that. And I know we speak glowingly about this, and the one thing that I try to make clear when I'm doing night presentations is nobody has the answer. Like these guys are doing it right and everybody else is doing it wrong. They're constantly evolving and wanting to get better. And I think one thing that I've really taken away from these programs too is how willingly they are to share this kind of information, because you can very well see a program that's the best of the best that thinks they've got the secret sauce and they're not telling anybody. But any of these clubs, it's every person I've tried to connect with is, yeah, when are you free? I can do and they've sent me all kinds of different things of like how they evaluate their coaches, or this is our practice plans for U9, and this is like they're willing to share that information because they feel like what they're doing is going to help grow the game by sharing it as well.
Yeah, that's super interesting, man. So in our area for sure, but like around the world, one of the interesting things that I've noticed is that a lot of these European programs, and I know everyone likes to speak glowingly, like you said, about the European programs, but when it comes to international competition, like we have like maybe 10x the population. Like the amount of, we did one of our episodes, we actually looked at all the numbers of registered hockey players by country, and the US and Canada are so far ahead of these places, and Sweden can put a team on the ice, and Finland can put a team on the ice that can compete, can win against the powerhouses that we have when we have 10x the population, right? So with all of that stuff that's going on, or all the stuff that's going on now in Ontario, open borders, like the prep model starting to be a lot more popular, at least here, like out in Western Canada, it's been popular for a while. Where do you see the youth hockey kind of systems going, at least in Canada, US? Like is there a trend you see in what is popular, what kind of model is becoming more popular, or where over the next 5-10 years what it's going to look like, or what's going to be the more dominant kind of player in terms of youth development?
The one that I'm working on right now, it's funny that you mentioned the smaller countries compared to the bigger ones, is HS Riga in Latvia.
Latvia, man. What a tournament, man. The World Juniors.
Just it. So crazy. All of a sudden is that their hockey director said the same thing that I think anybody would have said. Is we've been doing this for a while now. it's now starting to bear its fruit, and now people are noticing what's going on. But and I'd had that conversation to get off track, I think, for the 86th time in this conversation that we've had. Yeah. Eric Silverman, who's the hockey director in the Dallas Stars Elite program. One of the things that I was really interested with him, because they were only 2 or 3 years in when they had kind of taken over, was like, how do you know that what you're doing now is working? Like, it's so future dated that in 5 years you may not have produced anything, and maybe this isn't working, maybe this is, so what does that even look like? But from a youth perspective, the thing that I struggle with open borders and all that, and I appreciate the NIL stuff and that's happening in the US, and I appreciate all of the open borders and giving players opportunities and stuff. To me, I think for an organization, there may not be a better time in a club or organization's history to really put the microscope on themselves and see what you're doing and how you can do it better, because you now aren't just like, the clients aren't coming to you because they have to, because they want to. But where I struggle is with all the amalgamations and things like that are happening, I feel like we're shrinking our levels to exclude a lot more people than is necessary. We've got 5 or 6 A centers in our area, and everybody's talking about amalgamating in one and the other, and this one's going to come with this one. And so, we're shrinking the number of goalies from 30 to 20. We're shrinking the number of defensemen from, what number to what number. That's the scary part for me, is that we're going to lose some of this, and we're jumping to elite a lot faster than we really need to. And there's a number of different variables to that. But, Hermantown is a great example of, like, Minnesota is the community-based model. Like, there is no AAA teams in the state of Minnesota. If you tried to do that, it just would not work. They have 144 schools in the state of Minnesota that operate as their own organizations. So there's 144 power plays. There's 144 goalies, starting goal. Like, they have the masses, and their numbers continue to increase. Where in Ontario and in Canada in general, and I think North America as a whole, yeah, we've seen some ups and downs over the last couple of years, and a lot of it being out of control with COVID and stuff that we couldn't handle. But are we creating opportunities for kids, or are we now pulling back opportunities? Is, I think, the big question that I don't like the answer that it seems to have presented itself over the last couple of years.
Do you think that, I always go back and forth talking about this kind of stuff, because on the one hand, I agree with everything you just said. On the other hand, I'm thinking, is there enough organizational power around to actually do a good job? Right. So like on the flip side, I always think, like, okay, if this organization really can't do these things that we're talking about, they can't figure it out, they can't put a good plan in place, is it better to just trim the fat on some of this stuff and let it sort out over the next years? Because, like, when I was a kid, I remember, like, there was really, really good AA players that, and like, now I don't even know what it's like. There's like B, double B, and A, and like, I don't even know what it really is. But for me, there was AAA, there was AA. The AA teams were pretty good. There was like 4 or 5 AA teams that were pretty good. And those kids didn't come up to play AAA. Like, we were begging them to come and play. Like, because I started playing right away when I was U10. But we had like 5, 6 guys on our team, 2 that ended up getting drafted that didn't join our AAA team till like U15, right? So that'd be like man and minor, which, like, that would be ridiculous now. Like, if you wait till band and minor, like, people think that's crazy. So I'm always of 2 minds on, like, on the one hand, it's, I get that, you shrink things down a little bit and there's not as much opportunity at some of these levels. But on the flip side, it's like, if they're really not having a good experience with some of the organizations, maybe there's a little bit of accountability that you need to be a good organization to survive to a degree, to make sure that you can get some of these kids that are going to have a good experience and develop 1 through 17, and not just, your top 3 that probably would get drafted anyways, or probably go on anyways with or without your coaching help.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
No, exactly. Like, that was, Jonathan Taves was the example that Shattuck St. Mary's used of a guy who came to the school, but had already been developed and learned somewhere else. Like, the joke with their Tom Ward and their staff was very much like, we're just here not to screw it up.
Yeah. Exactly.
We get Nathan McKinnon in here, and these guys, like, we better make sure that they're better than when they came in the door. But 100%, and I think what we're missing as well in that, and there's, again, I'm spitballing ideas or throwing out questions I don't have answers to, but who or what does an organization necessarily have to answer to, right? Like, there's no definitive thing that if I'm in a small town somewhere and I want to start a hockey association, that I've got to meet certain requirements and that from a organizational level, from a Hockey Canada, from an OMHA level, whatever it is. But to actually execute, there really isn't anything to that. So that's why again, when I say open borders is an unbelievable opportunity for organizations, like, if you're doing it the right way, and you're working with all of your kids, you've got great coaches, kids are having a great time, all of that stuff, this is going to be your time to shine. Because everybody's going to see the grass is greener on the other side, and maybe I'll go play here, maybe play here. But once the dust settles on that, the one thing that I hope Open Borders is going to create from an organizational level is we're going to be able to see there's a pretty clear line in the sand of who's doing it right and who's doing it a different way. And so one will flourish, and one, is going to be what it is. I mean, there's going to be parents and kids and organizations that just want to win and kick everybody's butt in the province and go on their merry way, where there's others that, are trying to create great experiences for all 15, 17 kids that are on that group. So I get it for sure. Like, if you can't handle it, or if you're not doing a great job of it, should you be able to have a hand in impacting these kids? And that's, again, a life wide type of scenario. At these kids' age, when we're talking about AAA and single A hockey, like, other than their parents, statistics show the person that has the most influence on these kids at that age group is their coach in whatever sport that they do. So if an organization can't do that, can't meet that expectation of a player and parent, then certainly not. I think from a number standpoint, where I'm kind of concerned is we're not giving everybody a chance to be elite. We're deciding who's elite sooner and kind of moving that along.
Yeah, totally agree. So we talked a little bit before about, we've been trying to set this up for like a year, by the way.
I know.
But, so it's nice that we got to do it.
We had it all set up, and then I had mentioned it to you a couple of times, and then we had a time set up, and then it was me that bailed that time.
No, but I'm happy you did it, man. It's funny.
Thanks again for having me.
Yeah, it's fascinating learning about some of this stuff. So what's going on with this the cohort program that you're doing, the consulting stuff with different programs? What exactly is it that you're doing, and what's the goal that you're trying to achieve? Is it kind of teaching some of this stuff, like to try to help them and support them to become better organizations or stronger organizations, or what's the goal with what you're trying to do here?
Very much so. That's kind of the goal of it. I'll start with the goal and then kind of work backwards. Like for me, like I've never played a game of organized hockey in my life. I've never coached a game. I started getting, like, as a fan, watching hockey when I was probably 11 or so. I go on the ice with my little guy, and I'm on the bottom half of skating ability amongst the 8-year-olds. Like, I'll never be a good skater, I'll never, but I've been given a gift by the coaches site and with the guys in Leamington and all that, to be around some just unbelievable people. Again, I'm not trying to toot my own horn or brag or anything, but I get Zoom call with Yari Curry, with Peter Forsberg, Rod Brendamore. Like, I see a couple of names that I've got saved on my phone just to show my buddies. Like, hey, you want to call Rod Brendamore? We call him right now. Like, it's unreal. But then you also get a chance to talk to the U13 head coach at Jokerit, who absolutely loves his job, and he doesn't want to be anything more than a U13 coach in that organization. And you learn so much from him. The pastor from Shattuck St. Mary's was one of the first. Father Henry is one of the first people I talked to. Like, I was trying to explain it to my girlfriend afterwards, and I was getting emotional. Like, there's some people that are just like incredibly special people. Like he really, in a half an hour conversation with a complete stranger, made me feel like he really cared about me. Like just amazing stuff. So being able to be around these people and learn from these people and all that, I feel like my responsibility of that is to share what I've learned with an organization, with a coach, something like that, that's looking for a little bit of guidance too. So I kind of, again, I've worked with a couple of organizations. We've done a few Zoom calls and want to make it much more specific to like, where's your delta? Like, what are you trying to work on? Where do you think your organization needs to get better? Because, I've been able to pull information on 20 different topics of conversation with 12 different hockey organizations that have seen it all been done different ways. It's not necessarily all the answers. It's just, hey, maybe this is the way this works. Maybe you can try this. This is something that I've learned. And then from the coaching cohort perspective as well, like again, small group, we got 6 of us going right now. We're going to start another one pretty soon. And it's going to be, again, just trying to either share some of this, bounce ideas off each other, create a network of coaches. There's not enough support for a coach that really wants to do a good job at the level that they're at. I mean, we jump to the NHL and we talk about, I joke about Rod Brindamore, but Rod Brindamore may not be the best U10 coach if you were to trade places, and you're probably not the best NHL coach, but something to what he's said and what I've learned from him in writing these articles and putting this together is going to be able to help you. And I think, if anything, having not been able to experience hockey as a kid and play hockey, and now having a son that plays hockey, and my daughter plays some soccer, and she absolutely hates hockey because of me and her brother now. But to be able to give the coaches and give the organization something that's going to help a kid like my daughter or my son or anybody else's son or daughter just enjoy their experience as a kid, I think ultimately is what I'm trying to reach out to.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. So how do people get in touch with you? How can they find out more about this stuff? Website, social media, anything like that?
Yeah, easiest way to find me is on LinkedIn and Twitter are the two that I may use for the most part. Instagram is just going to be pictures of my kids, but they're cute kids, so throw a picture of them on there. Right. So what is, that's probably the easiest way to find me in one of those ways too. I mean, if you're at the Nature Fresh Farms Recreation Center on Sunday, as we recorded this ahead of time, stop by and find me. But that's probably the easiest way to find me. You can find me through the coach's site too. And again, just want to share what I've been able to learn with as many people as I can, in hopes that end of the day we can make organizations, youth sports in general, better than it is today.
Yeah, awesome, Matty. Well, I appreciate you coming on. This was really fun. Let's do it again.
For sure.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, thanks, man.
Thanks.